Terrifying Border Patrol stories that will make you think twice. I've been a Border Patrol agent for nearly 15 years, stationed on the southern border, where the desert stretches for miles and the heat can be unbearable. Over the years, I've seen some pretty strange things, a few that would make your skin crawl. But nothing compares to what happened last summer, something I can't quite explain, something that still haunts me every night. It was a quiet night, which is rare out here. The only sounds were the distant cries of coyotes and the soft rustling of the wind through the brush. I was patrolling a remote stretch of the border with my partner, Jim. We were miles away from the nearest checkpoint, just the two of us and the darkness. The moon was bright, casting long shadows over the rugged terrain. We'd been driving for hours without seeing a soul when our radio crackled to life. Dispatch had received a call from a rancher about strange activity near his property, close to where we were patrolling. Jim and I looked at each other, a bit puzzled. This area was known for being quiet, too far from the usual crossing points. But orders were orders, so we headed in the direction of the call. As we approached the ranch, something felt off. The air was colder than it should have been, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. We parked the truck and got out, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. The rancher's property was vast, bordered by a low fence that was barely visible in the moonlight. We moved cautiously, our boots crunching on the dry earth. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement, a figure darting behind a shed, just on the edge of our lights. I called out, "Border Patrol, come out where we can see you." But there was no response, just an eerie silence. Jim and I exchanged a look. We'd dealt with plenty of people trying to avoid us before, but this felt different. We split up, moving around the shed from opposite sides, trying to corner whoever it was. As I rounded the corner, my flashlight beam caught a glimpse of something. A figure standing still, just beyond the fence, looking right at me. I couldn't see their face clearly, but I could feel their gaze, cold and unnerving. I called out again, but the figure didn't move, didn't make a sound. Jim came up behind me, his flashlight joining mine, but by then the figure was gone, vanished into the darkness. We crossed the fence, our lights scanning the area, but there was no sign of anyone. It was like they disappeared into thin air. As we stood there, trying to make sense of what we'd seen, a cold wind whipped through the desert, carrying with it a faint sound, like a whisper barely audible. It was coming from the direction where the figure had been. Jim and I moved closer, our lights dancing over the rocks and sparse vegetation. The whispering grew louder, more distinct, but we couldn't make out any words, just a soft, mournful wail. Suddenly, the temperature dropped even more, the cold biting through our jackets. Then we heard it, a low, agonized moan that seemed to come from all around us. My blood ran cold. It didn't sound like a person. It sounded like something inhuman, something suffering. Jim grabbed my arm, his face pale. "We need to get out of here," he whispered. We turned back toward the truck, moving quickly, our flashlights sweeping the ground in front of us. That's when we saw it, a set of footprints just ahead, leading away from the fence. They were fresh, but what struck me was how deep they were, like whoever made them was carrying something heavy or was impossibly heavy themselves. We followed the footprints for a short distance, but they ended abruptly in the middle of an open patch of ground. No rocks, no bushes, nowhere for someone to hide. It was like they'd been swallowed by the earth itself. Jim muttered a curse under his breath, and we both turned back toward the truck. Our nerves frayed. As we reached the truck, I glanced back one last time, and that's when I saw it again, the figure, standing right where the footprints had ended. This time, I could see more clearly. It was a man, but there was something wrong about him. His clothes were tattered, and his skin was pale, almost glowing in the moonlight. His eyes were dark, empty voids that seemed to swallow the light around them. He raised a hand, as if reaching out to us, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Jim shouted for me to get in the truck, and I did, slamming the door behind me. As we drove away, I looked back through the rearview mirror, but the figure was gone. We reported the incident when we got back to the station, but no one believed us. They said it was just our minds playing tricks on us, that the desert does strange things at night. But I know what I saw, and so does Jim. A few days later, we found out the rancher who had called in the report had passed away the night after our encounter. Heart attack, they said. I've been on Border Patrol for over a decade, and you'd think by now I'd be used to the long, lonely nights in the middle of nowhere. But there are some things you just can't get used to, no matter how tough you think you are. This story isn't about the people we catch or the dangers of the job. It's about something far stranger and much more terrifying. It was a late summer night, and I was out on solo patrol. The desert was quiet, save for the distant howl of a coyote. My headlights cut through the darkness as I drove along the dusty trail, not expecting much action. Then around 2 a.m., I got a call on the radio from one of the other agents. "Hey, you near Sector 7? The voice crackled through the static. I confirmed I was close and asked what was going on. The agent, Tom, sounded tense. "Got a weird report. Some hikers said they saw something out there. Might be a lost migrant, but they didn't get a good look. They said it was crawling." I shrugged it off. It wasn't the first time hikers mistook an animal for a person in distress. Still, I turned my truck towards Sector 7, which was a rugged area with sharp rocks and thick brush, a place where only the desperate would try to cross. As I approached the area, I slowed down, my flashlight ready in one hand, scanning the terrain for any signs of movement. That's when I saw it, a figure, low to the ground, moving slowly, almost methodically, across the desert floor. It was too dark to make out details, but I could tell it wasn't walking, it was crawling. I radioed Tom, telling him I had eyes on something and was going to investigate. As I got closer, my headlights illuminated the figure, and my heart skipped a beat. It was a man, or at least it looked like one, but he was moving in a way that wasn't natural. His limbs were bent at odd angles, almost like a spider, and he crawled on his hands and feet with his stomach nearly touching the ground. "Hey," I shouted, stepping out of the truck, my flashlight pointed straight at him. "You need help?" The figure stopped and turned its head toward me. The way it moved, slow and deliberate, sent a chill down my spine. As the light hit his face, I realized he didn't look right. His eyes were wide and glassy, and there was something off about his skin, like it was too tight over his bones. I took a cautious step forward, but before I could get any closer, he let out a low, guttural growl that froze me in my tracks. Then, without warning, he darted off to the side, moving impossibly fast on all fours. I tried to follow with my flashlight, but he was already out of sight, disappearing behind a cluster of rocks. I ran back to my truck, grabbing my radio, calling for backup. "Tom, I need you out here now. There's something not right. I don't know what it is, but it's not normal." As I waited for Tom to arrive, I kept scanning the area with my flashlight, my nerves on edge. The desert was eerily quiet, the only sound the pounding of my own heart. Minutes felt like hours. Then, just as I started to think I imagined the whole thing, I heard a scraping sound behind me, coming from the truck. As the light hit his face, I realized he didn't look right. His eyes were wide and glassy, and there was something off about his skin, like it was too tight over his bones. I took a cautious step forward, but before I could get any closer, he let out a low, guttural growl that froze me in my tracks. Then, without warning, he darted off to the side, moving impossibly fast on all fours. I tried to follow with my flashlight, but he was already out of sight, disappearing behind a cluster of rocks. I ran back to my truck, grabbing my radio, calling for backup. "Tom, I need you out here now. There's something not right. I don't know what it is, but it's not normal." As I waited for Tom to arrive, I kept scanning the area with my flashlight, my nerves on edge. The desert was eerily quiet, the only sound the pounding of my own heart. Minutes felt like hours. Then, just as I started to think I imagined the whole thing, I heard a scraping sound behind me, coming from the truck. I spun around, and my breath caught in my throat. The figure was back, but this time it was crawling up the side of my truck, its head tilted unnaturally to the side. Eyes locked onto mine. I stumbled back, nearly dropping my flashlight. The thing opened its mouth, and I saw rows of sharp, jagged teeth, too many for a human. It let out that same growl, a sound that seemed to vibrate through my bones. Just then, headlights appeared on the horizon, Tom's truck speeding toward me. The figure glanced at the approaching lights, then scuttled off into the night, disappearing into the desert brush faster than any human could move. Tom pulled up beside me, jumping out with his weapon drawn, but the thing was already gone. We searched the area for hours, but we never found any trace of it. No footprints, no sign of where it might have gone.